he plugged it in and it came up and it message says low fuel pressure, which meant either there was no pressure in it or the fuel pump broke. So by process of elimination, so he explained put this flammable liquid into the side of the car. Yeah.
You tried for whiskey?
Right, we're up to Menvavon base. About 8 lines from the bottom. We discussed yesterday very lot about the bracha of Succa and the bracha of Lulav. So we were discussing till now the bracha during the 7 days of Sukkot. That's Cholamoid, Yom Tov, etc. But now we're discussing what about Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres gets very complicated. Why is Shmini Atzeres complicated? The suffix if it's Sukkot or not. By the way, here, you see who sits in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? Okay, who doesn't sit in the Sukkah? So Rashi writes that even if your minhag is not to sit in the Sukkah, it's not a minhag. It's such a wrong minhag that even if your father has minhag not to sit in the Sukkah, you ignore the minhag and you have to sit in the Sukkah. If you have a minhag not to sit in the Sukkah, Rashi, it's not a minhag. You don't sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. You should. Well, we'll get to learn the Gemara now, but just before I start a small thing, do we shake Lulav and Shmini Atzeres? No. Why not? What's the difference that Lulav we don't shake? Sure, what would you say? What's the difference that Lulav we don't shake and Sukkah we do sit?
7 days have been already. 7 days already.
Sukkah's also been 7 days. What? Shmini Atzeres. Right, it's a separate Yom Tov, it's Sophic. Why do we sit in the Sukkah? We are not sure. Oh, so you said Tesis and you said the Ran. But let's go very slowly. But there's one more, so you're missing one. Yeah, it's the hardest one, I have to admit. Again, it's a very fundamental question. Everybody talks about it. What's going on? On Shmini Atzeres, we sit in the Sukkah. We're going to learn the Gemara inside in a minute. Why is the Sukkah? Maybe it's Sukkahs. We don't shake Lulav. The question is, why not? As if it's a suffix. That's why we keep 2 days, first day Sukkahs. We treat it as if we're not sure, even though we do know. We treat it as if we don't know. So the question is, why do we shake Lulav on Shmini Atzeres? Tesis says, what? Oh, that's what David said, that it would detract from Shmini Atzeres. Why? Because by shaking, this is what Tesis says, by shaking the Lulav, everybody knows that what you're thinking is Sukkahs. By shaking, sitting in the Sukkah, could be you just fancy the fresh air. Could be you fancy to sit in a different room. You like the couches, you like the decorations. It doesn't detract from Yom Tov because it's not clearly evident that it's not to do with the Sukkah. That is what Tesis says. The Ran says like Ben. I said Ben, she said like the Ran. That a Sukkah is for 7 days min haTorah. So the 8th day is a Sofek Doraisa. That means you've got 7 days Doraisa. The 8th day, which is when it says, we're not sure if it's Sukkahs. It's a Sofek Doraisa L'chumma. But Lulav, how many days is it Doraisa nowadays? Only one. The reason we do the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th is if it's only Midrabanon. Takanas who? Who made the Takana? Who made the Takana? A famous person. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made the Takana. So we should sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres because it's a suffix that maybe it's Sukkahs. Even if it was Sukkahs, it's only D'Rabbanan. Suffix D'Rabbanan is L'kula. There's one other answer. And that is that Lulav is actually Muktzah. So you'd be over an Issa by shaking the Lulav. By shaking, sitting in the Sukkah, you're not actually doing an Avera by sitting in the Sukkah. There's 3 answers. It's not Muktzah. Everything is not Muktzah. It's my left. There's a very, very big chiddush that the Hasidim did. If you ever read the biography, they've got it here. That I'm pretty sure they used to have it. I mean, it's in that room, the coffee room. 3 volumes of Vilna Gaon. One of the things that disturbed the Vilna Gaon more than anything else is that the Hasidim stopped sitting in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Really disturbed them. And that's why the story is that even when he wasn't well, he was sitting in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres because he held that it's like more is going to say it. But the Achronim, the Kabbalah Sanal and others, came up with a heta why we don't need to sit in the sukkah nowadays. Can anybody think very carefully? If anybody does it, deserve of hot water. Why on Shmini Atzeres nowadays, after I've just explained 3 reasons why we sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, we don't shake lulav. Why nowadays, if you don't sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, you've got a valid excuse. We daven for rain in time more as well. Cold, you have to say better. It means like this. One of the reasons we said is it's not clearly evident. Shaking in lulav, everybody sees. You're obviously not treating it as yom tov. But shaking sitting in the sukkah, maybe you want the fresh air. Says come in the sun. That's all and good and well if you live in a country like Iran, where it's a warm weather, and maybe you want to sit in the sukkah for the fresh air. If you live in Europe, which the Hasidim did, and it's freezing cold, when you sit in the sukkah, you're declaring loud and clear that what? That I'm doing it because of sukkah, not because of Shmini Atzeres. So therefore, you'll be mezalzel. No, because even if you got it in your house, if you open the roof, it's cold.
Honestly, my next door neighbour often bring you have a sukkah.
That's in the summer. In the winter.
I don't know that one.
So therefore, the Sandal came along with this big chiddush, and many people took after him that you don't have to sit in the sukkah. The Chassidim do it. Okay, it's not going to touch the Chassidim. We should just know that the Gaon writes terrible, terrible things about it. Okay, but must. That's always not speak at the end. It's only in Chutzlah. I hope you've got it all very, very clear. The 3 reasons, the difference between lulav and sukkah. You missed a very big geschmack thing, Moishe. What? That which is lost can never be gained.
You can watch on YouTube later.
It's not the same. Again, 3 reasons why you're after the show, you'll ask somebody. 3 reasons why we sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, we don't shake lulav. But this is all to do with what we do. The question is about the bracha. Now we're going to go into it. Actually, a lot of what we said is only going to be inside the Gemara, but sometimes it's good to get a clarity a little bit outside. And says the Gemara, with base 8 lines from the bottom. Vanon and us. The Isnon Shre Yomi, that we have 2 days, meaning that we keep everything as a suffix. Heichi of din, and what do we do? Omar by Shmini suffix Shvi Osa. Your esrog will be muktzah on Shmini Atzeres. Why is it muktzah on Shmini Atzeres? Because maybe it is a Shana Rabbah, and you have a mitzvah to shake the lulav. And even though we don't shake the lulav, because we just said 3 different reasons why not, but the fact is, there's potential to shake the lulav. So the Shmini Atzeres is muktzah. Again, esrog is muktzah for its mitzvah. We don't actually shake the esrog on Shmini Atzeres, but in theory, we should have to. So therefore, it's muktzah. Shib on Simchas Torah, suffix Shmini, mutter, it's mutter. Shmini, suffix Shmini, mutter, it's also mutter on Shmini Atzeres. The reason being, the way the Rishonim explain it is that since you don't shake the esrog, you can't say it's muktzah mitzvah. At the end of the day, you're right that potentially there's a mitzvah on the esrog, lying on the esrog to shake it. But since practically you're not going to shake it, therefore it's not muktzah. So the Gemara says, "B'sura and surah of the k'merema, they did like k'merema of shish b'davidi avad k'abaya v'chasek k'abaya the halachas like k'abaya." Now the esrog is muktzah on Shmini Atzeres. You must remember that your esrog is muktzah on Shmini Atzeres, right? So let's put your esrog down. You can't just move it around the Shmini Atzeres. Let's say you want more space, etc. Shmini suffix shvi. That Shmini Atzeres, which you're not sure, maybe it's a Shana Rabbah, it's a 7. Shvi the Succa. It's like the 7th that you have to sit in the Sukkah. The Shmini the bracha, but regarding the bracha of, Rashi will explain, I'm jumping ahead. Rashi explains it's referring to the bracha that we say in Shmini Esra. That means on Shmini Esra, when it's Sukkot, you say, let's say, Nyale v'yovoi, v'yoim chag ha-Sukkot hazeh. On Shmini Atzeres, what do you say? Why do you change it? Because it's a different Yom Tov. Now, if you look in the Sidurim, you'll have different girsois, different, what's girsa in English? Different versions, different texts. So now, if you look in Rashi, and the Shavuot quotes this Rashi, it's the second to bottom line of Rashi. There's so much to be said on that. Let's look at this. In Shmon Esrei, in benching and in Kiddush, you say, if you look in the Svarad Siddur, and the Svarad Siddur will say, it's an argument, what is the correct text? And if you have, again, the Chassidim, but Maisa, Rashi's girl says, which is what I say, but Maisa, you should just know that the argument goes so deep, and there's so many shittas on either way, that whichever one you say, you've got plenty of people to rely on. right? There's like dozens of people say that way. The Vush or the Modcha, they all argue back and forth. What is the correct version in Shmones? Okay.
What's the sort? What they argue about?
Just how to pronounce it. Do you say Sima Shmini, the 8th day, which is Chag Atzeres? The Shmini Atzeres, because the Shmini Atzeres is the 8th of Atzeres Chag. I don't know if there's anything deeper than that.
It sounds different. Shmini Atzeres is the Chag.
That's right.
Shmini is the Chag of Atzeres.
Yes. Okay. So Gemara says, we treat the next Shmini Atzeres. The more explains, Mesav, sitting. Everybody agrees you sit in the sukkah. Do you make a bracha leishav sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? Says, well, everybody agrees you sit in the sukkah. The shayla is, do you make a bracha leishav sukkah? The man dama shvila sukkah bracha dami brachinon, make a bracha. The man dama shvila zelazeh bracha dami brachinon, we don't make a bracha. Let's just read that top thesis from Zayin Dalef because we talked about it quite a lot. The top thesis, very interesting thesis. Basically, I'm going to pick this. Everybody agrees you sit in the sukkah. But lulav le'otzle sakin kalish yitenu misafik. They never made it like takana. Top thesis from Zayin Dalef. I wish you'll catch 2/3 of what you missed. So the thesis that in lulav they never made a takana that you should shake a lulav on Shmini Atzeres, right? If you show yontav a muktzele tiltul, uminkir the milse, everybody can recognize shenoi be minik chut. Our sukkah, sometimes people enjoy sitting in the sukkah. So if you've got no proof that you're doing anything against something by sitting in the sukkah, take what Rabbi Yochanan said in your hand. They all came to sukkahs on Shmini Atzeres. So you see that we don't make a bracha leishav sukkah Shmini Atzeres, because Rav Huna and all the great leaders did not make a bracha. Furthermore, the reason they make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres does not prove they don't make a bracha. But Dilma, yesterday we learned there's an opinion that once you make a bracha on Neshva Sukkah once, you don't make the bracha again. So maybe the reason they didn't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres is not so much to do with the fact that you don't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres, it could be because they made the bracha already. It says, well, Gemiri, we know to Me'afa also. They came from the Meadow. Rashi explains that what happened was they hadn't yet sat in the sukkah the entire sukkah. Every single commentator discusses this. It's a very strange thing. And if you go to Litva Shavov, it's a kind of Gemara that you will know. The Gemara says that Rav Huna and all the leaders hadn't yet sat in the sukkah till Shmini Atzeres. Why? Because they were looking after the animals. Since they were looking after the animals, they didn't have time. They weren't able to sit in the sukkah. We said, Shemei Behemoth, Paturim in our sukkah, bottom of the sukkah. So therefore, all the people came for the very first time to sit in the sukkah was Shmini Atzeres. And even so, they didn't make a bracha. Is a proof that what? You don't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres. Okay. Some say the reason they never went in the sukkah till Shmini Atzeres was because it was a time of danger. Since it was a time of danger, the government were against them.
All right.
And therefore, it's not right.
Not anyway, it's dangerous to
No, but the question is, why didn't they make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres? Because the government officials didn't want to sit in the sukkah. When they came to Shmini Atzeres, they realized that then the government stopped looking. Then they came to sit in the sukkah, and they still didn't make a bracha. Is why they didn't make a bracha. It's similar to the Shema. There's a famous goal on the right, that the reason we say Shema in the Musaf Kedusha, right? In the Kedusha, the Chazal says Shatz and Musaf. Why do we say Shema? Because the government was made a rule they're not allowed to say Shema, and they waited till Musaf to say Shema in order to avoid the government officials. They couldn't stay in shul so long, the government officials. They got bored. All the Mishaberach, they left the shul. What happened was they didn't stay for Muslims, and then they would say Shema then. Similarly, some say that they sat the Sukkah for themselves first time. Okay. For which? On Shmini Atzeres. It's a Safek Brachas if you don't know. The Gemara brings a machlokes of what was the takana, the original takana. You're right that nowadays perhaps it would come into play Safek Bracha L'Hakel. In the times of the Gemara is trying to establish what was the bracha. Can't say Safek Bracha L'Hakel. Safek Bracha L'Hakel is when we don't know. These people knew whether you make a bracha or not. So the Gemara says, "We don't make a bracha. We sit. What holds that extra? We don't sit. Omar Yosef Nekuta Abicha Biyotcha the Mod the Shmaita Mani Babyuda Shmuel Bashelas. Because Rabbi Yehuda Bashmur Bashedas was the one who was the head of the psak. Over Shmini Safik Shvir Bam Sukkah Yosef. He sat outside the sukkah. The Hilchasa Meisiv Yasvinom. We sit in the sukkah. Bruchalim V'Vachinam. We don't make a bracha. So the halacha is that we do not make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres Leishav Sukkah, but you are obligated to sit in the sukkah. And as I mentioned, the Rashi holds that those who have a minhag not to, it's not even a minhag, and they can ignore it, and they have to think. My father actually comes from Hasidic background. Somebody told me that Metra the Kiddush was discussing which Hasidus. My father, it's quite a long time ago, came from Hasidus, but we came from Alexandria Hasidim. My father does not sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. But I asked permission. They said it's fine, obviously, with him. I do sit in the sukkah. Because if you look carefully in the halacha is that you do sit in the sukkah, and those who have a minhag not to should make every effort to change that minhag, because the halacha is you are supposed to sit in the sukkah. So more now goes into a new thing about the shechionu. Which Yom Tov do not say shechionu? There's always a famous rule. Anybody know? Achron Shel Pesach, Shvi Shel Pesach, Shvi Shel Pesach. Every single Yom Tov, Shani Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Shavuos, Pesach, you always make shechionu. The exception is Shvi Shel Pesach, you don't make shechionu. And where do we know from this Gemara? Omar B'Yichlon, Oimim Zman B'Shmini Shel Chag. You say shechionu and Shmini Atzeres, but Oimim Zman B'Shvi Shel Pesach. Now, why is that? Why don't we say shechionu and Shvi Shel Pesach? We do on Shmini Atzeres. Because it's a new Yom Tov Shmini Atzeres. Shvi Shel Pesach is not. Now the Gemara goes through many different proofs to prove that Shmini Atzeres is a new Yom Tov and Shvi Shel Pesach is not a new Yom Tov. Says the Gemara like this. Teda. Again, Teda. You should know. There are three differences between Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot. What are the three differences with Sukkah? On Shmini Atzeres is limited to sit in the Sukkah. Belulav, not to shake lulav. We're going to learn later about the pouring of the water on the Mizbeach. It happened every day of Sukkot, is not on Shmini Atzeres. Is the raya that what? That's a different Yom Tov. Very good. Rabbi Yehuda argues and he says that they actually did Nisach HaMayim also on Shmini Atzeres. So how many differences are there between Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot? Two. Very good. They said there's three. Sukkot, Lulav, and Nisach HaMayim. According to Rabbi Yehuda that you do Nisach HaMayim on Shmini Atzeres, how many differences are there? It's only chaluk in two different ways. I can find you a difference between Shvi Shel Pesach and the beginning of Pesach. What's the difference? What's the difference between Shvi Shel Pesach and the beginning of Pesach? No, we don't say shechionu because it's all one Yom Tov. But l'chayro, we could prove that Shvi Shel Pesach is a different Yom Tov. The halachas of Shvi Shel Pesach is different. Why is the difference? Chiv matzah. So they said chiv matzah. The more answer choluk. B'achilas matzah. There's a difference in Shvi Shel Pesach at the beginning of Pesach. First night Pesach, you have to eat matzah. So the seventh day Pesach, you don't have to eat matzah. The first day Pesach, you do have to eat matzah. So let us say that just like Shmini Atzeres is different from Sukkot in the sense that Shmini Atzeres, for example, you don't shake lulav or Sukkah or do Nisach HaMayim according to the Chachamim. Also, but the first days you do, so that's a difference. So Pesach is also different. As Moses says, it's different from the first night. It's not different from the first day. It's different even from the day. More adds another point. Shmini Atzeres is different from the day before, i.e., Hoshana Rabbah. The Shvi Shel Pesach is only different from the first day Pesach. There's no difference between Shvi Shel Pesach and Shishi Shel Pesach or Chamishi Shel Pesach. Therefore, since there's no difference between the 7th, the 6th, and the 5th, and the 4th, and the 3rd, it's not a new Yom Tov. If it's not a new Yom Tov, we don't say Shechianu. So far the Gemara said one piece of logic, and that is like this. We don't say Shechianu on Shvi Shel Pesach, and we do say it on Shmini Atzeres, because on Shmini Atzeres it's a different Yom Tov in three different ways. Sukkah, Lulav, and Nisach HaMayim, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, just Sukkah and Lulav. But Pesach is not different. You have to eat matzah. That's the first night, but it's not all the days leading up to Shvi Shel Pesach. Omar Papa, when it comes to Shmini Atzeres, you only bought one cow. When it comes to Sukkot, how many cows did you bring? I think it's 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. Altogether it comes to 17. So the first day you bring 13 cows, next day 12, next day 11, next day 10, next day 9. So how much should you in logic bring on Shmini Atzeres? 6, Rashi says. There you go. 6. And how many do you bring? Only 1. Is a raya that what? That Shmini Atzeres is a different Yom Tov. When it comes to all the 7 days of Sukkot, it says and on the second day, and on the third day, and is a word which connects and adds to the previous words. But when it comes to Shmini Atzeres, it doesn't say Ubayom Hashmini. What does it say? Bayom Hashmini, to prove the 8th day, not and on the 8th day, the 8th day. What do we learn from that?
It's not connected.
It's not connected. But Rashi Omar Hochiksiv Kemishpat, that's going to say Mishpat Tom. It comes to the Sukkah, it says Kemishpat Tom, that you bring all the Kabbalahs like their rules. Here it says Kemishpat, but Shmini Atzeres says Kemishpat. It says it in the singular, it says different Yom Tov, and therefore it's not part of Sukkot. So there's 4 different ways it's separate. Separate in mitzvahs, Sukkah Lulav and Nischamayim. It's separate in the number of cows. It's separate in the fact that it says Bayom and Ubayom. And it's separate in the fact that it says Kemishpat Tom regarding Sukkot and Kemishpat regarding Shmini Atzeres. Lema Mesali.
Sorry, you said Sukkot one, then before you said we do have to sit.
Yeah, we only sit in the Sukkah because maybe it's still Sukkot. But the day of Shmini Atzeres does not obligate you to sit in the Sukkah. The reason we sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres is because maybe it's still Sukkot. But not because of Shmini Atzeres. There's no mitzvah in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. It's only we sit in the Sukkah because it might still be Sukkot. Yeah.
Even though we know it's not.
Again, this is a very troubling thing that we know the calendar and yet we treat everything. The Sefer Moishe is an unbelievable Sefer. It talks about that somebody once came to Chazanish. Chazanish was discussing a certain halacha. So the first eventually got frustrated that Chazanish was spending so long. He said, "Hey, it's only D'Rabbanan anyway." And the Chazanish literally lost it. He said to him, "Do you realize how much D'Rabbanan is?" So nearly everything we do is D'Rabbanan. He says, for example, second day Yom Tov, Chazanish kept second day Yom Tov even when we went to Tzor, because he was Choshesh second day Yom Tov. We don't put on tefillin because we do D'Rabbanan, it's his Yom Tov. Seder night, everything that we do, the whole second Seder night is all D'Rabbanan. We keep it all and everything else. How can you say about such a thing that's only D'Rabbanan? Well, it says like this. We're going to try and prove that you say Shechiyanu on Shmini Atzeres. The halacha is every day of Yom Tov you bring a certain korban musaf. Every day of Yom Tov is different. Rosh Hashanah is different from Kippur, is different from Sukkot, etc. Now, what happens if you're supposed to let some first day Sukkot? You have to bring how many sheep? 14 sheep. How many cows? 13 cows. How many rams? 2 and 1 he goes. What happens if you're missing one of the sheep? You've only got 13 sheep. You don't have 14 sheep. Should you bring sheep? No. If you've got no sheep, you can still bring cows, but you cannot bring 30 cows. You bring no cows at all. The Makiv says, Rabbi disagrees, and he says, cows, it doesn't matter. So if let's say the first day of Sukkot is supposed to bring 13 cows, unless you only have 10, how many cows should you bring according to Rabbi Yehuda? 10. According to Chachamim, bring none. He says, Rabbi Yehuda, I'll prove it to you that it doesn't matter if you don't have so many cows. Why? We see that the Torah is not so bothered about the cows. How is it not so bothered? Because every day we go 1 less, 13, 12, 10, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. So the fact that the Torah goes down every day with the cows is a right that the cows aren't that important, and therefore if one's missing, it's not so bad. They said to him, if you're going to have that logic, the sheep also go down. Why? The first day you do 14 sheep, the second day 14, the third day 14. Well, on Shmini Atzeres, we go down in the number of sheep. If we go down in the number of sheep, is a raya that also the sheep shouldn't matter. So according to you, if anything goes down, it doesn't matter if one's missing, but the sheep as well, it shouldn't matter if one goes down. On the other hand, so he said that you can't compare Shmini with the Atzmayu. Shmini Atzeres is a whole different Yom Tov, and that's why it goes down. I'm referring to Sukkot where it's going down, not Shmini Atzeres where it goes down. Hope the logic is clear. It's hard to understand the Chachamim. The Chachamim said to him, you say the cows go down, we'll say the sheep go down. He said, what do you mean? The sheep go down on Shmini Atzeres, it's a different Yom Tov. I'm talking about Sukkot going down. Oh, just like the 7 days of Sukkot, you have to do a korban. Which korban? Each day there's a certain korban musaf. The shir. Every day of the Sukkot, you'd have to say a certain shir. The Gemara later will tell us what the shir was about. Each day of Sukkot, the Levim would sing a different song. Rashi tells us the common denominator of all the songs was that always had to do with what? Anybody know? No, giving things to the poor. Because Sukkot is the time when you collect all your produce, it's mitzvah to the poor. Or bracha, and Sukkot has its own distinct bracha, belina, and the mitzvah to stay overnight. This is an important halacha. Whenever you went to visit the Beis Hamikdash, you could never leave the day you came. You always had to stay overnight. The way we learn it is like this. The pasuk says, "For Nisa Ba'Boike, you should go up." This after bringing the Korban Pesach, by the way. You should go back in the morning. You should turn in the morning. You should go home. You should go back in the morning and go home. After you bring the Korban Pesach, go back, turn back in the morning and go home. Which day do you bring the Korban Pesach? 14th. So which day is the morning after? Now, can you go in the morning on the 15th home? No. It's Yom Tov. So which morning does it mean? The 16th. I ask you a question. Why does he have to go back on the 16th morning? Why not go Motzei Yom Tov? Is a right that whenever you come for Yom Tov, you never go back at night. You always have to stay one more day. So if you come, let's say you only get to the Beis Hamikdash on the third day Chol HaMoed Sukkos, you can't go home third day Chol HaMoed Sukkos. You have to go home fourth day Chol HaMoed Sukkos.
Here you go, 14th.
No, because here besides that, you came on Yom Tov. The visit of Yom Tov, visiting on Yom Tov, it's a different visiting. On the 15th, you have to visit the Beis Hamikdash because there's mitzvah Aliyah L'Regel coming to the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Tov. Once you go to the mitzvah of visiting, you have to then stay overnight. What did you want to say, sorry?
Yeah, you can't travel that because it's dark.
No, that means the Torah wouldn't tell us such a thing. The Torah would just say, go home, and leave it up to you to choose when you want to go home, at night or in the morning. The Torah says, if Lisa Baboika, go home in the morning, the Torah is always telling you, don't go home at night. That's the issue they have to say. Torah asks a very complicated question, the answer is more complicated, is that since there's a mitzvah to always bring a korban, so there's another din that lina, every korban is mechayev lina. Every korban obligates you to stay overnight. So if you bring a korban, you can't go home that night. So there's the kasha that why do you need a halacha of lina for Yom Tov? You've always got lina for korban. This is a suggestion that we're talking about. Somebody bought a korban shlomim, which can be eaten for 2 days, and he bought the korban shlomim the day before he arrived. And I thought this got a very complicated question how you would have it in lina, and you only came the second day. Then you still have to stay the next day. Okay. So the mice. Sukkot requires a korban, a song, a bracha, and lina and staying overnight. Af shmini, also shmini atzeres on korban. You have to bring its own separate korban. The shir. Rashi says, I do not know what song they sang on shmini atzeres. Look at the fourth to bottom taste. That means the taste is closed up shir. Pirus b'kudshus le'ipor shmal shir shmini. I do not know what was the song on shmini atzeres. I don't know, says Rashi, what song the Levim sang in the Beis Hamikdash of Shmini Atzeres. Now those who have the minhag that every day they say this song which the Levim sang in Beis Hamikdash, any of you have the minhag? And that was a case say for a lot of people had the minhag. That every day of Yom Tov to say this song which they used to say in the Beis Hamikdash, to say it at home in shul. So that's where it comes up. If you've got a certain siddurim have it inside. I saw the Siddur of the Gorn has it. It's got all those mizvoim which you should say. Okay, so Tosfos tells us which song they used to sing in the Beis Hamikdash. It is Tehillim, which one? Tehillim Yud Beis. Okay. Actually, to go in the shir of bracha, it's also bracha belina. Says the Gemara in Zayin on Beis. My love, does it not mean when the Brisa says it has its own song, its own bracha? Zman, it means the bracha of Shechionu. Loi bichas hamozin v'tfilah. It means the bracha of benching and davening, which is the bracha which we mentioned earlier, that when you mention davening or benching, you have to say Ya'aleh v'Yavoy and include the day Shmini Atzeres Hagazeh. It says, V'achidam mistabel. This Hakadat Zman, if it was Shechionu, Zman kol shiva mi'ikah. The Brisa says that Sukkot has 7 days of bracha, one kind of bracha, and Shmini Atzeres has a different one. If we talk about Shechionu, you don't say Shechionu all 7 days Sukkot, you only say it's the first day. Says, well, hello, kasha. That's not kasha. If you don't make the bracha now, if a person to make a bracha shechianu first day sukkos, you make a bracha the second day or the third day, whichever day you remember, or to the next day. Says the Gemara, I've got a different problem. You need a cup. Whenever you say shechianu, you should always say shechianu on a cup of wine. And therefore, Rashi tells us at the Chol HaMoed, most people do not have wine. Since they do not have wine, it's unlikely that they will refer to the bracha of Shechianu. But Rashi writes in the it's an interesting thing, that some people are makbid to drink wine every day. I told you we talked about this once before. So it says from this Gemara, it seems that they were not makbid in old days. Because Rashi says over here, if you look at the Rashi, we call Mokoim, it's a third line from the top. Even if you don't make the bracha the first day, we don't kiss the yain. People don't have wine on Chol Hamoed. So you see that you don't drink wine on Chol Hamoed. Says the Gemara, you can say Shechianu wherever you want, even in the marketplace. You always been on Kois. If you need to say to the Shechianu on the cup, do you ever get a cup? So the Gemara says, no. Maybe that Brisa which says that you say Shechianu all 7 days is referring to a person who happened to have a cup of wine, and you've got no raya that you can say Shechianu without a cup. Let's just summarize. Rabbi Yechon came along with a chiddush that what you do say Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres, and you don't say Shechianu on Shvi Shel Pesach. The Gemara tried to bring a proof from the Brisa that mentions that you make a bracha all 7 days of Sukkot, and you make a separate bracha on Shmini Atzeres. The Gemara suggested that we're referring to the bracha of Shechianu, and there's a proof to Rabbi Yechon that you make your own separate Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres. The Gemara pushes away the proof, and the Gemara says, no, it's referring to the bracha of the davening bracha of Yom Chag HaSukkos, Yom Chag HaSukkos. The Gemara says, but in the Havamina that you understood as Shechianu, there's no cup. And if there's no cup, is a bad you can say Shechianu without a cup. Does the Gemara? No. That maybe we're talking about a situation, the person did have a cup of wine, and that's why he said Shechianu. Okay. Says the Gemara, some of you, the Shmini Tzornina, does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that on Shmini Atzeres you have to stay overnight? But Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, the Pesach Sheni Sheni Tzornina, Korban Pesach, the second Pesach Sheni does not need to stay overnight. Shnema, which is the pasuk we learned the concept of lina, because the pasuk says go in the morning to take away the night. Uksiv, next to that pasuk, in the same pasuk, it says, and actually in the following pasuk, for 6 days they eat matzahs. The pasuk puts together the juxtaposition of the two psukim together, the fact that the two psukim mentioned together, the mitzvah of lina and the mitzvah of eating matzah for 6 days teaches us es sheton shisha, a yom tov which is a lengthy yom tov ton lina, a she'enu ton shisha, a yom tov which is not, it's only for 1 day in the ton lina. What's that coming to exclude? So it's coming to exclude Shmini Atzeres because that's a very short yom tov, it's only 1 day. It's only coming to exclude Pesach Sheni and not any other Yom Tov. Therefore, every single Yom Tov you do have lina. The exception is Pesach Sheni, and we learn out only Pesach Sheni, and that's it. Says the Gemara, it makes sense that you have to do lina on Shmini Atzeres. That's not. Habikurim, this week's parsha, the mitzvah of Bikurim, to in Korban. Every time you brought Bikurim, you also had to bring a Korban. Can you imagine? It's an amazing thing what they did with the Bikurim. You have to bring one pomegranate. You have to bring a basket. You have to adorn it. You have to paint the ox leading the way with its horns gold. You have to play music the whole way. Everybody in Yerushalayim would stop the work to go and greet you. It was a whole major procession for one mitzvah. Besides for everything else, you also have to bring a korban shlomim every time you brought bikurim. How do we know it? Because the pasuk says v'samachto b'chol ha'tov. This week's parasha, and another pasuk says v'zavachto shlomim v'achat shlomim v'samachto. Shlomim makes you happy. And the pasuk says, "V'samachta," you have to do your korban. B'shir, the Levim would sing a special song when you'd bring the bikurim. Anybody know which song the Levim would sing when you bring the bikurim? It's the one which we say just before Baruch Shema. I praise you, Hashem, that you have saved me. That is the song the Levim would sing every time you brought the bikurim. Utnufa, Rashi, you have to wave the bikurim. Velino, and you have to stay overnight. Every time you want bikurim, you have to stay overnight. Man Shema stayed overnight. Nufa, who is one who holds up bikurim, needs to be waved. Rabbi Yehuda, V'kamaton Lina. It says you need to stay overnight. And if it is true that Rabbi Yehuda holds only a long yom tov, you have to stay overnight, but a short yom tov not. So why would by bikurim you have to stay overnight? Because it's only 1 day. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Menachto is utnufa. It means to wave it. Atem is utnufa. You say means waving. Or maybe just means put it down on the floor. Because when the pasuk says being nichoya nocham, or the pasuk that he mentions putting it down. That's referring to tenufa, to waving. So we see that with the hose you have to wave the bikurim. And the same verse that says waving says you have to stay overnight. Is a right that Yehuda holds you do have to stay overnight even by Bikurim and therefore also by Shmini Atzeres. The Tanav Lokach HaKodesh Tanav Yodchom. Limit ala Bikurim Shetunun Tnufa Diva Bles Ben Yaakov. Bles Ben Yaakov holds that Bikurim also needs to be waived, but he learns it from a different apostle. My Talmud of Bles Ben Yaakov Asi Yad Yad Mishlam Ksivach of Lokach HaKodesh Tanav Yodchom should take it from your hand. Uksivach of Yod of Devieno. Es Ishe Hashem. Ma kan Kohen af Lalon Kohen. Just like they mentions the owners Afkan Balim or Kitzat Kohen when they are Balim or Mainif, the owner and the Kohen would waive the Shlomim and the Bikurim together. We separate them. Each time you bought a Korban Shlomim, or you bought a Korban, or you bought a Bikurim, then you have to waive it. Let's just like a couple of things. Let's just summarize what we've learned so far. We had the halacha that you say Shechon on Shmini Atzeres. The Gemara proved that from a brayso that says that you have to make a special bracha. The Gemara rejected that. The Gemara says that maybe the bracha is referring to the tefillah bracha. So the Gemara says, but that's brayso which mentions that you have to lean on Shmini Atzeres. How can that be? Rabbi Yehuda holds that you don't do lina. The Gemara says yes, Rabbi Yehuda holds you do lina. The only time you don't do lina is Pesach Sheni, but all other times you do. The proof is that you do by Bikurim. The Gemara rejects the proof. The Gemara says it's Rabbi Yaakov. I just want to discuss a fundamental point. There are many things that need waiving. Anybody tell me something that needs waiving? One needs waiving. We just said two. What's the two we said? Bikurim. What's the other one? Shlomim. Every time you come on Shlomim needs to be waived, Bikurim needs to be waived. Anything else need to be waiving? Yeah, I meant with the Kohen. With the Kohen. Something which the owners and the Kohen wave together. What else needs waiving? What? Shlomim, that's the Shlomim we mentioned. There's also the sheep on Shavuos. More interestingly is the Sota, the Kohen, the basket. No, the Mincha. Now the pasuk, the Gemara says that who would waive it? The owners with the Kohen. So imagine you're a Kohen, right? I'm the owner. How are we going to waive it together? This is the basket which has got the Kohen, or it's the bowl which has got the Shlomim, or it's the Mincha of the Sota. I'll be the woman, the Sota, you'll be the Kohen. How are we going to waive it together, the two of us together? Do you want to suggest how you should do it? There's a machlekes, a fundamental machlekes, which is discussed in many places. Tastes over here, discussed by that. One way to do it is I'm going to have to do it because Chaim doesn't want to risk catching anything. Anyway, like this. One way to do it is the Kohen puts his hands on the bottom, and the owners put his hands over here. We don't touch each other. And the Kohen is meniach tachas yad balim underneath the hands of the owners. How is that underneath the hands of the owners? Not touching. The answer is because the owners are the rim, the Kohen is at the bottom, so it's underneath in the sense that it's lower down. So lower down. That is how. Look at the second. Let's see the Rashi. The second two lines from the bottom of this page. The owners hold on to the edge. The Kohen puts his hands where Shulav is at the base. The Kach before says Tosfos that the Shami tells us that when it came to the Sota, it wasn't so straightforward. The Brisa brings a machlokes, maybe the Kohen put his hands on the woman. So she would put her hands here, and he would put his hands onto her. And the Shami asks the question, you're not allowed to touch a woman's hands. The Shami gives a few answers about what they did. But there, Tosfos says from there, it seems that when you wave, and you want to wave two people together, then you have to put one hand underneath the other. This says that maybe by the Sota and Mincha was different. It means it's a shaila whenever you have two people waving something together, by the Shamim, Bikurim, there's other things as well. How would you do it? Rashi held clearly, one holds the rim, one holds the bottom. It could be a machlokes in the Shani regarding by Sota, certainly the Shami disagrees. The shaila is also like Bikurim. Okay. Says the my have halach. What is the halach? What do we do? We say Shechion on Shmini Atzeres. Rav Sheshes Omar Einam is Shmini Shulchag. We don't say Shvechim on Shmini Atzeres. Velchasam Oimim is man b'Shmini Shulchag. We do say Shechion on Shmini Atzeres. Tanik Kvos Rav Nachman. We have a brayso like Rav Nachman. You do say Shechion. Shmini top of Memches Medalef. Regel b'fnei atzmo it is of. So when you walk into your shul with your son to shul on Yom Tov, on Shmini Atzeres, a month or two, so you'll say to him, today Shmini Atzeres is a special day. It's different from Sukkot. In what way? It's different in Pazer Kashav. And you'll ask your son, what does Pazer Kashav mean? And he'll list out for you the 6 differences between Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot, all easy to remember for the Rosh Hashanah Pazer Kashav. What are the 6 things? pious b'fnei atzmo. It has its own separate lottery. The Gemara later tells us that there was a whole lottery system. Who would bring the korban every day of Sukkot? Shmini Atzeres, they use a different lottery system. It was a different lottery system. Zman b'fnei atzmo. It is a complete, you say Shechiyonu on its own. So that's a proof that you say Shechiyonu on Shmini Atzeres. Regel b'fnei atzmo. It's its own separate Yom Tov. In one way, it's its own separate Yom Tov. We're trying to establish it's its own separate Yom Tov. To say that it is a separate Yom Tov is one of the, how can you add that as one of the six? I say to you, Shmini Atzeres is different from Sukkot in 6 different ways. And one of them is it's its own separate Yom Tov. That's not a detail. That's just going back to the rule which you just said. So Rashi answers, it's a regel b'fnei atzmo in the sense that you don't shake the lulav, you don't sit in the sukkah. In that way, it's a Yom Tov in its own. Tais doesn't like that. Tais gives a couple of other suggestions, but one of them is very interesting. It's halacha l'maaseh regarding Avelus. Every Yom Tov is counted like 7 days. So Shmini Atzeres is counted as its own 7 days. So if a person has to lose a relative before Sukkot, it's counted 7 days of Sukkot plus 7 days of Shmini Atzeres. That is what way it's its own Yom Tov. Okay. So we've got 2 explanations what means regel b'fnei atzmo, its own Yom Tov. Korban b'fnei atzmo, it's a separate kind of korban, as we mentioned earlier. We went down 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7 cows, and on Shmini Atzeres, you got 1 cow, it's a different kind of korban. Shira b'fnei atzmo, it has its own song. On Sukkot, all the songs had to matnes hanim. On Shmini Atzeres, it's a different song. And bracha b'fnei atzmo, its own bracha. And then we have a number of explanations what it means its own bracha. Anybody want to suggest one at least? We've said this a few times today. What means its own bracha? That you call it Shmini Atzeres Chagazeh, you don't call it Sukkot. Alternatively, Rashi says that it would make a special bracha on Shmini Atzeres to praise the king. Why would you make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres to praise the king? Anybody know the history? No, praise the king in the physical. Shlomo HaMelech finished building the Beis HaMikdash. He sent everybody home. When he first finished the building of the first Beis HaMikdash, he sent everybody home on Shmini Atzeres. So that's his own bracha. Okay. So there's other explanations. Those are the 6 differences between Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot. And therefore we do say Shechiyanu. The only exception when we don't say Shechiyanu is when? Shvi Shal Pesach. Very good. So a lot of halachas today. A lot of topics.